And that's why tonight I'm excited for the discussion that we will have with the American people. And so at this time I would like to yield to some of my colleagues who have joined on the floor for their take and perspective on the Keystone Pipeline. And I would yield to my good friend from Alabama, Martha Roby.
Very important leadership hour tonight. And of course, Mr. Speaker, I rise today to express my extreme disappointment over President Obama's decision to block the Keystone Pipeline by rejecting an application to build and operate the oil pipeline across the U.S. and Canada border. I think every American should be aware of the consequences. More than 100,000 jobs could be created over the life of the project, including an estimated 20,000 immediate American jobs in construction and manufacturing. And oil accounts for 37% of U.S. energy demand, with 71% directed to fuels used in transportation. That is equally true of a mother who drives her children to school as it is as the business owner who operates a fleet of delivery vehicles. When the price of gasoline increases, Americans hurt. And the price of gasoline increased 81 cents per gallon in 2011 alone. I support an all-of-the-above approach to energy, which includes opening up new areas for American energy exploration, transitioning to renewable and alternative energy, and using more clean and reliable nuclear power. In his State of the Union address, the President stated, and I quote, "This country needs an all-out, all-of-the-above strategy that develops every available source of American energy, a strategy that's cleaner, cheaper, and full of new jobs," end quote. In my opinion, his decision on the Keystone Pipeline is blatantly inconsistent with this very statement. The door is now open for this Canadian oil to go to China. Canada's Prime Minister announced his, quote, "profound disappointment with the news," end quote. While the Chinese government has ensured its future supply of oil and other energy resources, the United States has rejected a new source of energy that was laid at our doorstep. Mr. Speaker, I ask, how does the fact that China could receive this energy supply not serve our national interests? Mr. Speaker, I consider President Obama's decision a grave mistake. And on behalf of the American people who want secure oil and new manufacturing jobs, I hope that the Congress will continue to push him to reconsider this error in judgment. Again, thank you to my friend from Colorado for holding this important hour tonight on this very important topic to the American people for job creation. So thanks again, and I yield back.
Well, I thank the gentlelady for being here tonight and discussing the impact on her district with the Keystone Pipeline. And she brings up a good point when it comes to the price of gas. Reports that we have say that the discovery of the Canadian oil sands has the potential to change the current gas price dynamic. Bringing a massive amount of oil to market from a politically and economically secure source can restore market confidence and bring down gas prices. With that, I would recognize the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Johnson.
I thank my colleague for yielding, and it's great to be here with so many of them who also believe in not only the Keystone Pipeline, but that America can attain energy independence and security. You know, when the President came into office, gasoline at the pumps was about $1.68 a gallon. Today, it's approaching $3.40, in some places even higher than that. We face a dichotomy in leadership here in Washington, D.C. You just heard our colleague from Alabama talk about the President's State of the Union address, and he talked about an all-of-the-above approach to energy. Well, the administration's actions and their words simply don't match. And there's no more striking example of this than the President's rejection of the Keystone Pipeline, a project that would have created 20,000 immediate jobs, bipartisan support. Even the unions are supportive of that project. Upwards of 100,000 jobs as it trickled down through the life cycle of that project, and yet the President rejected it. Hardworking taxpayers across America, particularly those in my district along eastern and southeastern Ohio, are very tired of Washington taking more and giving less. They want real leadership. They want real solutions. And they want a return to American exceptionalism. You know, I remember, and I know many of you do, a time when we grasped the concept of American exceptionalism. President Kennedy told us back in the 60s, he said, we're going to go to the moon in 10 years. We didn't make it in 10 years, we made it in 7. Because he engaged every fabric of our society, academia, our industrial base, our economic base, our political will, even our military was behind this idea of getting to the moon. We saw industries crop up around space exploration. We saw millions of jobs created. We saw young people lining up to get into institutions where they could major in disciplines that would prepare them for careers in space exploration. Think about what would happen if we really had an all-of-the-above approach to energy similar to that. Think about what would happen if America had an energy policy that said, starting today, we're going to draw a line in the sand. And over the next decade, we're going to set a goal to become energy independent and secure in the United States. We're no longer going to sit on the sidelines. We're going to go after the 3 trillion barrels of oil that we already own. We're going to go after the natural gas we own because we're sitting on the world's largest deposits of it. We're going to continue to mine coal, and because we're going to invest in it, we're going to learn how to use it more environmentally soundly. We're going to expand our nuclear footprint because guess what? It's the cleanest, safest form of energy on the planet. We're even going to look at wind and solar and find out where they fit in the overall energy profile. We know they can't solve all the problem, but they have a niche where they can. But we're not going to sit idly by and do nothing. And we're going to start by telling our regulatory agencies to become partners in progress with American businesses. To become, rather than the Department of No, the Department of let's move the ball forward. And get over throwing up arbitrary barriers that's keeping America from going after its own natural resources. I submit to you, Mr. Speaker, that if we had that kind of all-of-the-above energy policy that had action behind the words, you would again see America believe in American exceptionalism. You would see young people lining up to get into institutions, to major in disciplines, to prepare them for advances in energy production and distribution and even usage. And at the end of the day, we would see and we would find out that we would learn how to produce and store and use energy in ways that we've never even imagined. You know why? Because I do believe in American exceptionalism. And I know that my colleagues believe in American exceptionalism. I just don't think that our leaders in Washington and in the White House and in this administration believe in American exceptionalism. There was a striking example back last March, last spring, when the Prime Minister of Australia stood in this very chamber and gave a presentation. We were all here. She related a story and she said, you know, I remember being a young girl sitting in front of my television and watching Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin land on the moon, thinking to myself, wow, Americans can do anything. She went on to talk about the history of America and Australia and how we worked together to address the world's problems and how America had stood by Australia during World War II. She gave many examples. At the end of her speech, she said, you know, I'm not that young girl today. I'm the Prime Minister of our country, and I've got a lot more experience under my belt. But I still believe that Americans can do anything. And I was sitting right over there. And I remember I could feel a cleansing breath take place in the House chamber. You could have heard a pin drop in here. We heard something from a leader of another nation that we so desperately want to hear from our own leaders. Mr. Speaker, America is the exception. We are gifted with the ability to innovate and compete and solve the world's problems, and we've been doing it for over 230 years. We can become energy independent and secure in this country. We can return the idea of American exceptionalism to this country. We can put the American dream back into play to the over 14 million Americans that are out of work and the 40+ million Americans that are underemployed. I ask the President and the Senate today to begin to work with us in the House of Representatives to advance the idea of a real no-kidding all-of-the-above energy policy, one that puts America first, above politics and above campaigning. I want to thank my colleagues for being here again tonight. Thanks for giving me an opportunity to share, and I yield back my time.
Well, I thank the gentleman from Ohio, and I'm sure you'd be interested to know this, and I'm sure you already know this, in fact, that according to testimony that was given before the Energy and Commerce Committee hearing last year on energy issues, the impact of Alberta oil sands development on the U.S. state economy, in your great state of Ohio, 13,200 new jobs could be created between 2011 and 2015 as the development of the Alberta oil sands moves forward. And the Keystone Pipeline is an important part of that. So as I know there are many visits going on to Ohio by this President, perhaps he can explain to the people who may be unemployed in your district, 13,200 new jobs could be created by the development of the Alberta oil sands, why the Keystone Pipeline was vetoed. So I thank the gentleman for being here today. And with that, I would yield to the gentleman from Arizona for his perspective.
Well, I thank the gentleman and my good friend from Colorado for yielding. And back home in Phoenix, Arizona, in my home district, one of the big things that we worry about is cost of gasoline. I went to the pump the other day, and it was about $3.60. It's about twice as much as it would cost back before President Obama was elected. And if you look at the statistics, in 2011, the average American household spent a record $4,155 at the pump. This is equal to 8.4% of the median family income. So this is a huge issue that we need to continue to find stable sources of oil so that we can have a secure source of oil, and we can make sure that we have more supply of oil so that we can start to bring the prices down for gas at the pump. And one of the things that I was, back before the President made his decision, I would go around and talk to people around my district, and I'd say, what if I told you that with the swipe of a pen, the President and his administration could create 20,000 immediate jobs and over 100,000 jobs over the long term, and there wouldn't be any taxpayer dollars put at risk or expended? What do you think we should do? Every single one of the people that I talked to said this President should sign that as soon as possible, and let's get to work making sure that the Keystone Pipeline gets put into effect and get people back to work. And then something funny happened. The administration decided to placate the radical fringe element of their party, and the President punted to 2013. Didn't even make this decision whether yes or no, just pushed it down the road. But House Republicans decided that we were going to give the President a second chance, a second opportunity to do the right thing, an opportunity to realize that the State Department had already done an environmental impact study that showed that there were very little chance for any environmental damage to some of the sensitive areas where the pipeline would be going. Maybe we could have the President realize that this is not the time to play politics. This is the time to get American people back to work, and that's exactly what the Keystone Pipeline would do. And yet, once again, the President punted. Now, we can't give him too many more chances. We've already given two chances for this one already. But when we all sat here at the State of the Union, and we heard him say that we were going to adopt the all-of-the-above approach, as some of my colleagues have mentioned earlier, we actually realized that that's not really the case. Because it seems as there's only favored sectors that actually get some attention from this administration. You have companies like Solyndra, Solyndra received $535 million loan guarantee from the government, as well as nearly $15 million in severance money for its employees when that company went bankrupt. A total of nearly $550 million taxpayer dollars were squandered. This is a risk that the American taxpayer should never have taken. And there's very little chance we're going to get any of that back because our rights were actually put lower than people who were giving loans after the American taxpayers. Now then you have another company, Inter1, received $118.5 million in stimulus grants before going belly up just a few moments ago. According to the Washington Post, Obama's $38.6 billion Green Job Loan Guarantee Program has created just 3,545 permanent jobs. That's a cost of $5 million per job. $5 million per job in a favored sector. You know how many taxpayer dollars would be spent to create hundreds of thousands of jobs for the Keystone Pipeline? Zero. And yet the President couldn't sign a simple sheet of paper to get this done. This is a no-brainer, as many people have said. So I hope that the President will reconsider. I hope that the House Republicans will continue to push this issue, because this is something that we can do right away. It is shovel-ready, to borrow a phrase, and this is something that will make sure that we are looking towards the future for our energy security. And I thank the gentleman from Colorado for addressing this important issue and for starting this conversation tonight, and I yield back.
Well, thank you. The gentleman from Arizona brings up a great point about Solyndra, Keystone Pipeline, and I think there is a real question about what kind of an economy we want in this country. Do we have a Solyndra economy that relies on government funding, government financing, and then rips off the American taxpayers? Or do we rely on a Keystone economy that creates private sector jobs, 100,000 private sector jobs? The Arizona Republic said that this is an article, an editorial that they wrote on January 20th of this year, just a couple of days ago. A lack of urgency regarding energy independence is only one of the reasons President Barack Obama is being shellacked this week by Republicans and Democrats alike for his disappointing decision regarding the Keystone XL transcontinental oil pipeline. The foot-dragging runs counter to the recommendations of the President's own Council on Jobs and Competitiveness. President Obama's choice is a bad one. He needs to reconsider. That was an editorial, again, from the Arizona Republic. And with that, I'll yield to my colleague and good friend from the state of New York, somebody who's been very active in natural gas production and certainly a leader in the Ways and Means Committee, Mr. Reed from New York.
Well, I thank my colleague from Colorado for hosting this special order tonight and for truly engaging in a conversation we need to have with America. And I would like to associate myself with the words of the gentleman from Ohio when Mr. Johnson spoke so eloquently about the need for a comprehensive energy policy, an all-of-the-above approach to getting us off of foreign sources of energy once and for all. I think Mr. Johnson really hit the nail on the head with his description of the American dream or exceptionalism and the ability that when in America we develop a plan, when we have a vision, we can accomplish anything. And I don't know if you notice, Mr. Gardner, I'm over here on the other side of the chamber tonight. And I'm an individual who is proud to be a member of the Republican Party. And many of the times I'm standing on that side of the chamber. But I am willing to come over on this side of the chamber to speak tonight, to say to my fellow colleagues across the aisle that my hand is open for us to join together on this issue and many issues that face Americans back at home. And this issue in particular, because it impacts all of us, all 300 million people across America. Because when we can commit ourselves, as the President did at the State of the Union, to developing a comprehensive energy policy of all of the above, I am confident that we can achieve that energy independence. And tonight's discussion on the Keystone Pipeline is an example of an administration and of folks engaging in old-school politics rather than focus on good, sound policy that is going to achieve that dream of energy independence. Because, as my colleagues have articulated, this project has been fully vetted, years of environmental studies and reviews. The primary agency, FERC, who had the responsibility to oversee the project, came to the conclusion that there were no significant adverse environmental impacts that were associated with this project. And it was on the verge of approval at the Department of State, who, if I remember correctly, the primary mission is to deal with diplomatic issues because this pipe crosses an international border. The President used that final act from an agency who is focused on diplomatic issues to reach in and, for political purposes, say no. And I applaud the gentleman from Arizona, and I associate myself with his words that we have given another chance to the President to do what is right, in my opinion. This is a project that is ready to go. It will put 20,000 people back to work, and that's what we've been talking about here for months, is improving this economy, jobs, 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 and with the stroke of a pen, the President said no to 20,000 jobs and 100,000 jobs on top of that. And he put an obstacle in the barrier of his own State of the Union message that we are going to accomplish energy independence with an all-of-the-above approach by taking action a week before and saying, for political purposes, we're not going to be able to achieve that goal. That has to stop, ladies and gentlemen. And I'm proud to be part of this freshman class that has come in November 2010, and I fundamentally believe that we are changing the conversation in Washington to focusing on policy over politics. And this is an example under this pipeline project that is going to be directly related to that change in conversation in Washington, because it's common sense type of approach to the job. It's about focusing on people, getting them back to work, committing ourselves to a vision of energy independence, which is so critical to our future, and also so critical to our future in the manufacturing sector, because if we can get energy from domestic supplies here and we can secure those energy sources long term, we're going to have lower utility rates, manufacturers are going to invest in America again, and we're going to start building things again. That has to be the cornerstone of what we're talking about, and the Keystone Pipeline is but an example of that. And one last point I would like to address. We here in Washington can impact people every day, and this is an example of that impact in a positive way. Because if we put the Keystone Pipeline online, every time an American goes to the pump to fill up his gas tank or her gas tank, you will see the immediate results of it in a lower price if we continue down the policy that the President has committed us to in not constructing this pipeline. Every penny counts in this economy. And so I'm proud to be down here on the floor tonight to talk about this key issue and also the bigger issue of making sure that we stay focused on the American dream of energy independence. And with that, I so wholeheartedly join my colleagues tonight, and with that, I yield the balance of my time.
I thank the gentleman from New York, and again, thank you for your constant leadership on our national energy security. And we do harken back to the time just a few weeks ago when the President gave his State of the Union address, addressed this chamber, the joint session of Congress, and it reminded me when he said, I'm for an all-of-the-above energy policy, and then, of course, vetoes the President said, I'm for an all-of-the-above energy policy, and then vetoed, basically with the stroke of a pen, as you said, the Keystone Pipeline. It reminded me of something that Yogi Berra might say. Yogi Berra might say, I'm for all of the above energy as long as it's not all of the above. That seems to be what we're hearing. And with the killing, with one single sign of 100,000 jobs, again, I think it shows where the real intent, in terms of job creation, some people would have this chamber try to follow. You mentioned the Department of State, and last week we had Carrie Ann Jones, Assistant Secretary of State from the Department of State, testify before the Energy and Commerce Committee and admitted that when it comes to the EIS, the no pipeline alternative, there was an alternative considered under the EIS, the Environmental Impact Statement. One of the options they considered was a no pipeline at all. And testimony before the Energy and Commerce Committee, it was admitted that that was not the preferable alternative. That was not the preferable alternative under the Environmental Impact Statement. So even the Department of State admits that the EIS on the pipeline envisions the construction of a pipeline. And yet the President said no. And so I thank you, gentlemen from New York, and the thousands of people that could be employed by the development of the Alberta oil sands. And I know the next gentleman, Mr. Conaway from Texas, that will be addressing the chamber. I don't know if he has the statistic right in front of him, but according to testimony again before committee, 170 firms supply the Canadian oil sands from Texas. 170 firms that supply the Canadian oil sands. And with that, I yield to the gentleman from Texas.
Well, I thank the gentleman from Colorado for allowing me to join in. And although I'm not a part of the freshman class, I hope they won't toss me out of the chamber as a result of that indiscretion. I wanted to walk us through kind of the process by which TransCanada has gone through trying to laboriously apply and comply with all of the rules, regulations, and hoops that anybody who tries to do a project of this scope has to go through. They began in September 2008 when they filed their application for a permit to build this pipeline. As been mentioned, the State Department would be not involved with this at all, except for the fact that this pipeline crosses an international border. If this were just within the United States, the State Department and the President would be out of the loop in this instance. But because this is an international problem, then the State Department gets a whack at this deal. In April 2010, the State Department issued their draft environmental impact study. Then a couple of months later, in June of 2010, EPA weighed in with the results of their technical review and said that the draft environmental impact study was deficient and didn't provide the scope and the detail necessary for decision makers to make their mind up. This is bureaucratic nonsense for stopping things from going forward, so that it allows one group of folks in the administration to brag on how hard we're pushing on this issue, while all the time they've got a backstop of the EPA that knows that they're not going to move anything forward. And then October 2010, State Department issued a supplemental draft environmental impact study. Only in America can you come up with these kind of titles to simply laying a pipeline across this country. Again, the EPA weighed in and said, no, this supplemental one is deficient, and you've got to continue to give us information. Although, when asked a little later on that month, Secretary of State Clinton was asked at a press conference kind of where are we with respect to the pipeline approval process, and she commented that we're inclined to say yes to the pipeline. And then in April 2011, the EPA again said that in a filing that the supplemental draft program environmental impact study was deficient. Finally, by August 2008, August of 2011, State Department issued its final environmental impact study, allowing for a 30-day public comment and a 90-day agency comment. And of course, it was during this agency comment period that State Department decided that a new route was necessary. That the original route that was planned and the alternatives going across the Ogallala, the 13 alternatives that were assessed, that this one really was the best, that somehow a new route was necessary, and that gave rise to the charade that we saw played out, where the President decided he was going to wait until after the election, and then Congress weighed in and said, no, you need to make that decision sooner. The State Department's decision to go or no-go on it has to be based on a finding that the pipeline is not in our national interest. Transporting this oil of almost 1.4 million barrels of crude and bitumen across this country to U.S. refineries would have to not be in the United States' best interest. And in fact, that's what the State Department found. After we passed the law with requiring the President to make a decision, the State Department suddenly decided that building this pipeline was no longer in the national interest and allowed the President then to say what he said. President's wrong-headedness on this issue couldn't be more than self-evident on its face. I want to talk real quickly about the safety issue. You hear a lot about that. I come from West Texas, middle of Odessa, San Angelo. There are thousands and thousands of miles of pipeline crisscrossing my part of the state. In fact, there are 3 oil pipelines that run through the front yards of the people who live across the street from me. And we've lived there for almost 15 years now, not a bit of trouble with pipelines, and they're inspected all the time, both inside and out, and observed from air and this type of stuff. So pipeline safety is not an issue. Drilling safety, by the way, I just want to pitch this in real quickly. When I left my home yesterday morning at 5:45 to come here, as I was closing the garage door, I could see the lights on the crown of a drilling rig less than a half a mile from my house. That's in operation. It's been in operation for about 4 or 5 months now, drilling wells that are actually that close to my house, and it's being drilled inside the city limits of Midland, Texas. So when we talk about, not in my backyard or all the other kinds of reasons why people don't want oil and gas production around them, I cover a part of the state where it's a badge of honor, and in fact, it's helpful on the 20th of the month each month when the royalty checks show up to do the. So this industry has got a great record of being able to operate soundly, not only in the drilling and exploration phases, but also in the production and transportation issues across. Let me give you one quick thing and I'll close. Wall Street Journal on the 19th had made a pretty good statement. It said, the central conflict of the Obama presidency has been between the jobs and growth crisis he inherited and the president's hell-for-leather pursuit of his larger social policy ambitions. The tragedy is that the economic recovery has been so lackluster because of the second impulse keeps winning. Yesterday came proof positive with the White House repudiation of the Keystone Pipeline, TransCanada's $7 billion shovel-ready project that would support tens of thousands of jobs if only it could get the requisite U.S. U.S. permits. Those jobs apparently can wait. And a couple of paragraphs later, very succinctly said, this is, to put it politely, a crock. And with that, Mr. Gardner, I will yield back.
Well, I thank the gentleman from Texas, and I'll show a map. Mr. Conway, a gentleman from Texas, referred to a pipeline. The only reason we have the Department of State involved is because it crosses a national boundary, and so you can see the pipeline right here where it extends. I already have some pipelines, and I know the gentleman, Pete Olson from Texas, will be addressing the chamber shortly and share even more about this route and the different pipelines that we're dealing with. But again, here it is, right here. That's the only reason the State Department's involved. The only reason that they had a hook to get involved, and as you can see, the hook was yanked and jobs were killed. I would like to follow up as well as with the editorial from a Detroit News. The Detroit News on the 20th of January. Detroit, Michigan, particularly hard hit by economic tough times over the past several years. This is the editorial. President Barack Obama is willing to wait and wait and wait for 20,000 desperately needed jobs. For someone whose operating slogan is, "We can't wait," it's curious that President Obama is willing to wait and wait and wait for the Keystone XL pipeline project and the 20,000 desperately needed jobs it promises. If the can't-wait president keeps dragging his feet, he will hand the Chinese yet one more competitive advantage over the United States. It's the Detroit News, January 20th, again, just a couple weeks ago. And I know the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Olson, has been very involved in the Energy and Commerce Committee, has been standing up for his state, energy security, jobs that would be created. And I'm sure you knew this already, but in Texas alone, the development of the Alberta oil sands could create as many as 27,000 jobs between over the next 4 years. And with that, I'd yield to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Olson.
I thank my colleague from Colorado and my brother on the Energy and Commerce Committee. And they say that imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. I've got the same chart that you have. And I want to focus my discussion tonight on national security. And I want to make sure that the American public understands the truth. I mean, there's been many misstatements from the administration about the safety, national security implications, the jobs, the Keystone XL pipeline. And while every American can have their own opinion, no American can have their own version of the facts. And that's why we're here tonight, to give the American people the facts. This is the Keystone Pipeline, as my colleague alluded to. And there are actually two Keystone pipelines. The first one, the little orange line here, that's the Keystone Pipeline, the plain Keystone Pipeline. Actually, oil is flowing through that pipeline right now, the Steel City, Kansas-Nebraska border, into St. Louis, and into Patoka, Illinois. That is happening right now as we speak today. The thing that's been controversial is the dotted line, the Keystone XL pipeline, which follows a similar path, ends up in the Gulf states, in my home area of Houston, Texas, the Port of Houston, and the Port of Beaumont, and the Port of Port Arthur. The real problem, following my colleague's lead, I want to point out 3 points. Little slivers right there. No one knows what it is. It's just an imaginary line. Those two crossing points, those pipelines cross from Canada into the United States, that's the only reason why the State Department is involved in this process. Some imaginary line between our two countries, and State Department has the approval authority. Again, I talked about the two ports down there in the Gulf Coast in Texas. Those refineries on those ports are the safest, most advanced, most efficient refineries in the entire world. That oil will be processed quickly, efficiently, in an environmentally friendly manner. We've just got to get it there. This part right here, the state of Nebraska, is the problem. And I'll go into that a little bit further. As the American people can see, this is a map of the central part of the United States where the Keystone Pipeline comes through. And just to get you oriented here, the yellow line that's hard to see, that's the Keystone Pipeline, the one that's existing right now, the one that actually oil is flowing to Illinois as we speak. The dark green line here is a proposed path for the Keystone XL pipeline. And the reason the administration is given for not approving this pipeline is because of this big pink area. And that's the Ogallala Aquifer that runs, it's mostly in Nebraska, and as you can see, goes into my home state of Texas. All these other lines here, all these arteries, all these little spin-offs, those dark lines, you know what those are? Those are pipelines. Pipelines that are going all through that aquifer. The Keystone XL pipeline is designed to be the safest pipeline in the entire world, much safer than all these other pipelines who may have been there for 50 years. The Keystone XL pipeline is going to be put in deeper, so it doesn't have the risk of some of the things. Most pipelines the integrity gets compromised because somebody on the surface drills into it. They're putting the pipeline down deeper to avoid that. It's got all these modern systems that monitor the pipeline status at a fixed interval, so if there's some sort of problem on it, it will shut down almost automatically and prevent further spills into the Nebraska aquifer. Again, not a problem. Again, all these pipelines are there. Keystone is the safest one, and yet the administration didn't approve it. And we all know the numbers. 20,000 shovel-ready jobs right now. 830,000 barrels of oil flowing a day down to the port in the southeast Texas ports. Energy security, national security. Now I'm going to turn and focus a little bit on national security. As the American people know, the Middle East is as unstable as it's been in most of our lifetimes. Egypt, Libya, Tunisia, all have new governments. Syria is on the verge of collapse. Yemen as well. And on top of all that, we have Iran. Iran that is actively pursuing a nuclear weapon. The world seems to be growing its appreciation of the threat that a nuclear-powered Iran has to our whole world's security. We in Congress here passed a bill imposing sanctions on the Iran National Bank. The European Union passed sanctions on Iran just this past week preventing them from purchasing any oil from Iran. But the Iranians responded just the way we thought, with lots of swagger, with lots of bravado, and what did they do? They talked about shutting down the Strait of Hormuz. Next slide, please. The Iranians shutting down this waterway, this choke point, is a very real threat to our world's economic stability and growth. And I may be the only member of Congress that's flown missions as a pilot in the United States Navy, a naval aviator, through the Strait of Hormuz. It's narrow. It's about 25 miles at its narrowest point. In my hometown, that's basically the distance between Houston and Galveston. It's shallow, 200 feet. A football field is longer than the Strait of Hormuz is deep. As you can see, the sea lanes where the tankers all cruise through are very close to Iran. They're not out in the middle of the strait. This little island over here, Abu Musa, is an Iranian island. So all the traffic going through that strait have to pass basically through Iran on one side, Iran on the other side. I'm not worried about my Navy having access through those straits. They can handle any situation the Iranians throw up. What I fear and I'm concerned about is all the tanker traffic that is currently going through those straits. 30% of the world's oil goes through those straits to Europe, to our country, to Asia. If those straits are shut down for any given period of time, our world will go into an economic collapse. We've seen this in the past. When I was a young man, started driving, late 70s, 16 years old. One duty I had, and it was this country again that was the problem. The Shah of Iran fell. The mullahs who are in power right now took over, and OPEC, we supported the Shah, and all the Arab nations involved in OPEC put an embargo on the United States. Overnight, we lost all this oil flowing through the strait. What happened? My colleague from Colorado talked about gas prices going up. They doubled in about a week's period. I mean, I remember, because my job as the new guy with a license, and I loved doing it because I was driving, man, was to get in the car, go down. It depended on what your license plate, the last digit. It was odd or even day. You could go get in the gas line. Some days it was 30 minutes, some days an hour and a half. But my job was to go in that line, sit there and wait until I got up there and could pump gas in the car. Again, gas prices went from 25 cents a gallon, which we can't imagine today, to 50 cents overnight. If those straits were to shut down tomorrow, with gas prices going up as they are right now, approaching $4 all the way across the country, we could see almost $10 a gallon overnight. $10 a gallon. So we can't diminish this threat that the straits will shut down. How do we fix this? How do we address it? It's simple. Have we developed energy sources right here in North America? And again, the administration, the State Department, has proven in the past that they will approve a pipeline based on the considerations I talked about. Let me give you an example of that. Again, lots of pipelines coming from Canada to our country. Just to get the listeners oriented again, the blue line, the dark blue line here, that's the Keystone XL pipeline. Well, actually, the dotted line is the Keystone XL coming down here. The blue line is the Keystone pipeline. The pipeline I want to talk about is the Alberta Clipper pipeline. And the Alberta Clipper pipeline is the yellow one coming here, right here to the point there in, I believe that is Lake Superior maybe, but right there in the northern part of Minnesota, and right there. And listen to what the administration, when that was approved a couple of years ago, here's what the State Department said. This is their record of decision and national interest determination. The Department of State has determined, through review of the Alberta Clipper project application, that the Alberta Clipper project would serve the national interest in a time of considerable political tension in other major oil-producing regions and countries by providing additional access to approximate, stable, secure supply of crude oil with minimum transportation requirements from a reliable ally and trading partner of the United States with which we have free trade agreements and further augments the security of this energy supply. If that was true 3 years ago for this pipeline, isn't it more true today for the Keystone XL pipeline? Why doesn't the President approve the pipeline immediately and give our country energy security and more national security? I mean, I don't know why I know why the President did it. It's very clear. I mean, when it first started coming out, all the winds from the administration were saying, well, we can't make a decision until sometime in 2013. The American people know what happens between now and 2013. There's a presidential election. The American people need a leader. They need someone to step up and do what's right for the country, do what's right for our security. I'd like to close by using a quote from the father of the United States Navy, my Navy, Admiral John Paul Jones. He was in a battle with the British ship, Superior, more speed, more guns. His ship was getting blown up pretty good. The British captain got one of those little megaphones and yelled over at Admiral John Paul Jones and said, "Sir, will you surrender?" And Admiral John Paul Jones said those immortal words that every sailor knows. He yelled back, "Sir, I have not yet begun to fight." The American people should know that House Republicans have not yet begun to fight for the Keystone XL pipeline. I yield back the balance of my time.
I thank the gentleman for his leadership tonight. And before he leaves the chamber tonight, and before I yield to the gentleman from South Carolina, I think it's again important to talk about something that you mentioned at the very beginning of your comments. The only reason the State Department was involved is because it crossed the border. The only reason they were allowed to kill 100,000 American jobs is because it crosses the border. If the pipeline was built from Fargo, North Dakota to Houston, Texas, would they have been involved?
No, sir.
And again, to the American people, we've heard it often, asked often by members of this body, where are the jobs? And I think we need to start asking, why not these jobs? Thank the gentleman from Texas, and with that, I'd yield to the gentleman from South Carolina, who has been very active in the fight for jobs in his home state and across this country.
Well, I appreciate the gentleman from Colorado allowing me to have a little bit of time to talk about this. You know, Canada is our largest and best trading partner. A good friend of mine was an ambassador to Canada. I have the opportunity to go up there and talk with him about this issue and why it's important to the United States. Why Keystone XL pipeline? How about the refining capacity we've got in the Gulf? How about the refining jobs that would be provided in a very hard-hit, post-horizon Gulf state economy? The gentleman from Texas was very clear, and they understand in Texas, as they do in North Dakota, that energy is a segue to job creation. You look at the unemployment rate in Texas or North Dakota, 3% unemployment. If you're looking for a job in this country, America, go to North Dakota. There are good-paying energy jobs right there today. And if we can get Keystone XL pipeline to be a reality, we'll have good-paying long-term jobs in the refineries in Louisiana, Texas, Mississippi, Oklahoma, and all the places that we're going. What I would like to talk about is use the President's own words. Because he said in his statement, and this is from the White House website, that the rushed and arbitrary deadline insisted on by Congressional Republicans prevented a full assessment of the pipeline's impact. Now, how long has this been going on that they've been doing the environmental impacts assessment that you talk so brilliantly about? You know, I came to Congress last year. This was going on well before I came here. A rushed assessment, and under the Obama administration, an $800 billion stimulus package and an unprecedented growth in government. Don't you think that we had the personnel in the Department of Energy to deal with this and do the assessment in a timely manner in order to approve a pipeline that will provide not only American energy independence, but North American energy independence, buying oil and natural gas from our largest and best trading partner, our friends in Canada, providing good-paying jobs in America. But I want America to listen to what the President also said in his own statement. He said that he was disappointed that Republicans focused on this decision. We should focus on this decision. This is about American energy independence, and it's about jobs. But he goes on to say, but it does not change my mind and this administration's commitment to American-made energy that creates jobs, and listen closely, reduces our dependence on oil, period. Not reducing our dependence on foreign oil, not reducing our dependence on Middle Eastern oil and countries that oftentimes don't like us very much, but lessening our dependence on oil, period. That is the dynamic that's driving this administration's policies, and America needs to know that. These resources don't belong to President Obama. They belong to the American people, and it's time we step up to the plate. And we use energy as a segue to job creation in this country. We trade with trading partners that like us, friendly trading partners within our own hemisphere. North American energy independence, if we can't have American energy independence, Keystone Pipeline. It is the answer to putting Americans back to work, and with that, I'll yield back. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen from South Carolina. And again, you can see the passion which so many members have tonight throughout this fight to create American jobs. And with that, we have a few remaining minutes, and I would yield to the gentleman from Virginia, who also, Mr. Griffith, who has also been a leader when it comes to energy security and American energy production.
Thank you very much. I appreciate these few minutes to speak. You know, I've been sitting here listening to everybody speak, and there have been very, very good points have been made by so many of the speakers. And it does come down to a couple simple things. It was a tough decision for the President, not because he didn't have the ability to make that decision, and not because he didn't have the ability and the materials to make that decision. As you know, in our hearing last week, Congressman Lee Terry brought in stacks and stacks of studies that have been done on this pipeline. But I think about it in the terms of my daughter, Abby, who's a 6th grader back home. Abby doesn't like to do her homework. She would much rather be talking to her friends or watching TV. President Obama apparently doesn't like to do his homework either. He would much rather be speaking to friends that tell him how great he is or being on TV. The bottom line is the same. I have to tell Abby from time to time, Abby, go do your homework. Read your materials. The American people need to tell President Obama on Keystone Pipeline, why can't you read the materials? It's all there for you. Quit making speeches about jobs and take action after you've done your homework. Do it, and do it now, and bring us the jobs you keep talking about. Get off the telephone, get off the speaking circuit, and put your nose to the grindstone and get the job done. And I yield back to my friend from Colorado.
I thank the gentleman for his time tonight. And again, as we wrap up our discussion, would just highlight the support the Keystone Pipeline has across this country. Again, you can see the people who believe that job creation, American energy security matters. It matters because we can create jobs now. We have an opportunity to develop our North American resources, to reduce our reliance on overseas oil. The question that these supporters ought to be asking tonight is whether or not they want to give up this project to China. I don't think they want China to win. And yet that's the decision this administration has made. 100,000 jobs, American energy security. With that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
Thank you. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 5th, 2011, the Chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Gomez, for 30 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's an honor to be here before you tonight. There's so much going on in this country, so many threats to our national security, and energy is one of them. And I am so proud to be a member of Congress with the freshmen that I've heard here tonight. They make the rest of us look good, and I'm so grateful for their discussion about energy. It doesn't make any sense to have more energy overall than any country in the world and then to pay billions, hundreds of billions of dollars to people, many of whom don't like us. They want to bring down this nation, and yet we're enriching them, actually engorging them on our money. And then we have a solution. One little part of the solution is a Keystone Pipeline. More oil coming from our friends in Canada, who actually are friends. They don't want to see this country taken down. They don't want to see this country attacked again like it was on 9/11. And then we have a hearing today on energy in our Natural Resources Committee. And we were trying to pass legislation out of committee that would allow us to provide more of our own energy. But the wrong-headed approach of this administration and some people on the other side of the aisle that is forcing us to pay billions of dollars to companies that have no good plan for producing energy, but a great plan for bilking, sucking the money out of this administration, ready to throw it on any whim that they can say somehow is a green job. Well, it seems to be more brown in color from where I come from. But anyway, we voted today in Natural Resources to once again allow drilling in this tiny area out of the Arctic National Wildlife Area in Alaska. I know that there are some people, even from this body, who have been taken up by so-called environmental groups and taken to areas of ANWR that are beautiful and are certainly worth keeping pristine. Not taken within 100 miles of the little area that we passed today to allow drilling in. It's a tiny part of the area that Jimmy Carter, as president, set aside back in the 1970s to allow drilling because there's nothing there. There's not a tree, a bush, anything that's living in that area in the way of wildlife can't stay because there's nothing to sustain them. They have to get out of there and go to the pristine areas. That's why Jimmy Carter set it aside as some place we could drill. Yet the wrong-headed approach of this administration is to continue to put off limits our own natural resources. But that's only one aspect of things that are going wrong in this country with this administration. So tonight, I want to pay tribute to a great American hero who has been demeaned. A man who has spent most of his life as an American hero fighting for Americans to have freedom of speech, and yet being condemned and disallowed the opportunity to have the freedom of speech. He repeatedly, over and over, laid down his life, or was willing to lay down his life, to provide for the rest of us. That is Lieutenant General, retired, William G. Boykin. He's a former commander of the United States Army Special Forces. He was a founding member of the Delta Force. He's also known for his devotion to the Christian faith, which at one time in this country, in fact, for 99.9% of this country's history, it was considered a good thing to be a person of faith and devoted particularly to a Christian faith. Jerry Boykin, Lieutenant General Boykin, graduated from Virginia Tech in 1971 and received his Army commission. By 1980, he was the Delta Force Operations Officer on the April 24th, 25th Iranian hostage rescue attempt. Now, I've talked to General Boykin about that before. I consider him to be a friend. Something that I had heard back during my days in the service was something that General Boykin said was above his grade back then, 1979, 1980, and it would be interesting to hear someone from the Carter administration actually provide documentation of the actual decision to reduce the number of helicopters that would be utilized to go into Iran to a staging area hundreds of miles inside Iran, meet up with C-130, other helicopters, other equipment rather, that was there in the staging area, and then from there stage the rescue effort that would go into Tehran and get our hostages. The story I would love to see documentation on, thing that I had heard as a member of the U.S. Army years ago, was that the original plan had at least 12 helicopters that were going to be utilized to go into the staging area, but the Carter administration believed that it might look too much like an invasion. So the word was back then that we heard, the Carter administration ordered the 12 helicopters reduced to 8 so it wouldn't look like an invasion. And that there were those who were engaged in the planning who said, you know what, we need 12 because the mission must have 6 helicopters to go forward from the staging area. These turbine engines will cross hundreds of miles of sand, and we have to count on perhaps a 50% loss of helicopters coming to the staging area. And since we know we need 6, we want to start out with 12 so that we have a better chance of getting 6 to the staging area. We knew where the hostages were, and yet people in the administration, ultimate responsibility resting with the President, decided, let's take more of a chance with the people we are putting at risk, sending in as the Delta Force. Let's put them even more at risk by making them go in with fewer helicopters. And as those in Delta Force at the time knew, all they knew apparently was they get to the staging area, if they don't have 6 helicopters, then the mission will be aborted and they'll have to turn around and go back. And since they were ordered to come in with 8 instead of 12 or more, they got to the staging area with 5. These American heroes who were not given adequate resources to go in and rescue our hostages in Iran by an administration you would have thought understood and appreciated the military, but apparently did not adequately. Even though President Carter had been in the military, you would have thought he would have understood. They get to the staging area, there are 5 helicopters, and the mission is aborted. One helicopter, one explanation was when one helicopter pilot was trying to lift off, once they knew it was aborted, everyone was anxious to get out. And a helicopter started up. Obviously the sand swirls. It's easy to get vertigo, lose sense of direction, and the helicopter went sideways, cut into a C-130, and we left heroic Americans on the desert floor in Iran, a terrible embarrassment And to this former soldier, I didn't think it was an embarrassment to the Delta Force that was sent in. They were ready to fight and die. But their orders were to go in. They were sent in without adequate helicopters. And when the mission did not go forward, people lost their lives. But, as we know from the old poem, theirs was not to reason why, but theirs was but to do or die, do and die. Some of them did. I would have hoped over the years the lesson learned from Vietnam would have been not that that was not a winnable war. As our colleague here, Sam Johnson, could tell you, after 2 weeks of carpet bombing, after North Vietnam had left the negotiation table, 2 weeks of carpet bombing, they came back, and as the Hanoi Hilton prisoners were taken away, Sam said one of the meanest officers at the Hanoi Hilton was laughing and said, "You stupid Americans, if you'd bombed us for 1 more week, we would have had to surrender unconditionally." Instead of being done in the 70s, that could have been done early in the 60s. The lesson of Vietnam should have been, we don't send our military men and women anywhere in the world on our behalf unless we give them the equipment to do the job, unless we give them the order to go win, whatever it costs, win and come home. That should have been the lesson. But it wasn't learned in Vietnam. And it apparently wasn't learned during the failed rescue attempt under the Carter administration. But these were American heroes who put their lives at risk for an administration that didn't fully appreciate what was involved. General Boykin, in February of 2003, received, he had 2 stars as an Army general, as commander of the John F. Kennedy Special Warfare Center at Fort Bragg, and was about to interview with Rumsfeld, Secretary Rumsfeld, for his third star nomination. He had received 2 Purple Hearts, one for Grenada in 1983, the other for Mogadishu, Somalia in 1993. He was involved as a commander in the Black Hawk Down scenario. From 1978 to 1993, General Boykin was assigned in various capacities to Delta Force. With Delta Force, he oversaw the rescue of CIA operative Kurt Muse from a Panamanian prison, and the capture also of Manuel Noriega, the brutal dictator who put him there, put Kurt Muse in that prison. In Colombia, our hero, Jerry Boykin, had helped hunt down the drug lord Pablo Escobar. He also hunted war criminals in Bosnia. He helped rescue hostage missionaries in Sudan. He tracked kidnappers in El Salvador. He spent 13 years with Delta Force and was, as I mentioned before, not only a founding member of Delta Force, but he was also ultimately later its commanding officer. In October of 1983, Major Boykin worked as an operations officer during Operation Urgent Fury in Grenada. During a dawn assault to free some Grenada government officials held by the Marxist People's Revolutionary Army, Boykin was shot in the arm with a .50 caliber round, splitting the bone completely in 2. He was told he would never use it again, but almost miraculously his arm healed, which Boykin again believed was a God thing. In October 1993, Colonel Boykin was in command of the Delta Force, tracking down militia leader Mohammed Farrar Aidid in Somalia, during which time the infamous Battle of Mogadishu took place. some will recognize. That is the Black Hawk Down scenario. That was the event. But April 1998 to February of 2000, Jerry Boykin served as the commanding general of the U.S. Army Special Forces Command Airborne at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. From March 2000-2003, he was the commanding general, United States Army John F. Kennedy Special Warfare Center, Fort Bragg, North Carolina. In June of 2003, General Boykin was appointed Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence under Dr. Stephen Cambone, Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence. Lieutenant Boykin retired on August 1, 2007, and currently teaches at Hampton-Sydney College. General Boykin is the author of Never Surrender, A Soldier's Journey into the Crossroads of Faith and Freedom, and also Danger Close, a novel, as well as Kiloton Threat, a novel. General Boykin attended the United States Armed Forces Staff College, Army War College, Shippensburg University, where he received a master's degree. His badges include the Master Parachutist Badge, Military Freefall Badge, Ranger Tab, Special Forces Tabs. Medals include the Distinguished Service Medal, the Defense Superior Service Medal with 3 oak leaf clusters, Legion of Merit with an oak leaf cluster. This is a real hero. Bronze Star, Air Medal, Purple Heart with an oak leaf cluster. This is an American hero, ready repeatedly to lay down his life for our right to free speech, to the freedoms we know and love. And yet, he was not so well treated. People thought it was inappropriate that a general would say basically the same things that Franklin Roosevelt did. Things like Franklin Roosevelt said in his prayer on D-Day, as he prayed on the radio, national radio broadcast. And during that radio broadcast, Franklin Roosevelt prayed for our troops against those forces of evil. I believe he used the word crusade in there. And yet, Franklin Roosevelt was never excoriated or crucified for the language he used in the prayer, because people knew he cared about our troops. People knew that he cared about Americans having freedom. So they never went after Franklin Roosevelt the way they have come after Jerry Boykin. General Boykin was invited to speak at West Point this year. My understanding, he was going to be speaking to West Point cadets at our U.S. Military Academy, cadets who were Christians, about how a Christian in the service of the United States reconciles his faith, his commitment to God, and his commitment to country. I would imagine most of us who are Christians, who served in the United States military, had those inner questions. Some of us found answers in Scripture, found answers in wise counsel, and found a peace afforded through prayer. Wise counsel is what I get anytime I talk to General Boykin. This incredible man, this American hero, who should be an American icon, was told he really should withdraw his acceptance of the invitation to come speak, because West Point, our U.S. Military Academy, not the military, but the people that this administration put in place, were too embarrassed to have this American hero come speak to Christian cadets at the United States Military Academy, where we also have a politically correct czar who monitors such things and makes sure we don't offend the people who want to kill us and destroy our way of life. So pressure was put. Gee, the military academy, those in power, allowed to be there by this administration with the political correctness in full display, didn't want to withdraw the invitation. They thought it would be better if he backed out of coming. This American hero will do anything his nation needs him to do, and he did something that I'm not sure I would have done. He said, sure, you don't want me to come, I'll withdraw my acceptance, I won't come. He canceled. This American hero who has repeatedly put himself between America and harm is not afforded freedom of speech. United States Military Academy cadets, because of this administration's approach, surely must feel that, gee, it's not a good thing to be a Christian in America if you're going to really live your faith. It's not appropriate to wrestle with religious issues unless, of course, you're a Muslim like Major Hassan, because if you want to speak freely, in Major Hassan's case, of course, and the private who was ready to kill people in the service with him as Major Hassan did, this military, with this administration's overblown political correctness, would not even deal with the private who did the same kind of interview that Major Hassan, that made the same kind of statement Major Hassan did. It was on the internet, basically saying if they make me deploy, I'll have to kill troops to avoid having to go face Muslims and possibly kill Muslims, for one of the reasons that we're not allowed to kill other Muslims. I'll have to kill Americans. What's wrong with this picture? Certainly wasn't a problem for the greatest American general, the greatest American leader in the history of the world, a general named George Washington. He believed so fervently in the same things that Jerry Boykin believed in. At one point he issued an order that you couldn't take God's name in vain. His approach was, how can we ask God for blessings and protection with the same mouth that's taken his name in vain? I can assure you, when I was in the Army, that was not a standing order. George Washington is the only person in the history of the world. Just down the hall is depicted in a painting resigning. He did the unthinkable. King George couldn't believe it. He led a military in a revolution, won the revolution as head of the military, tendered his resignation, gave back all the power, and went home. Recently stopped for refueling in the Maldives Islands. One of the leaders during a luncheon, we were talking, he said, you know, we have to constantly worry about the possibility of a military coup. This man on the other side of the world said, because, see, we never had a George Washington who set the proper pattern here. George Washington was a man of faith. Anyone who doubts that can read Peter Lillbeck's book, George Washington, Sacred Fire. Well, there's an article today, or yesterday, from Todd Starnes. The U.S. Military Academy pressured a retired U.S. Lieutenant General to withdraw from speaking at West Point prayer breakfast after Muslims and atheists complained, Fox News and commentary has learned. Retired Lieutenant General William Boykin was scheduled to deliver a speech at West Point on February 8th, but late Monday the Military Academy released a statement saying it decided to withdraw from speaking would be replaced by another speaker. However, a source close to the controversy told Fox News in commentary that Boykin was pressured to withdraw. Quote, "It was very clear they wanted General Boykin to withdraw," unquote, said the source, who asked not to be identified. And after you see what they've done to an American icon like General Boykin, you certainly understand why. Quote, "He asked them to rescind the invitation, but they were reluctant to do that, so he said he would take them off the hook," unquote. Teresa Brinkerhock, a spokesman for West Point, told Fox News in commentary the U.S. Military Academy did not decide this for him. Nothing is worse than political correctness and mistreatment of military heroes than dishonesty in doing so. After a conversation with our chaplain, Lieutenant General Boykin decided to withdraw. That's what she said in an email. Boykin, a former senior military intelligence officer, had been criticized for speeches he made at evangelical Christian churches where he said the American's enemy is Satan, that God had put President Bush in the White House, and a Muslim Somali warlord was an idol worshiper. That was enough to decide to try to destroy an American hero. Army Times has an article, "Retired 3 Stars West Point Invite Draws Protest," all about the controversy. New York Times, "General withdraws from West Point talk." The message is coming loud and clear to our military. If you're a Christian, if you're a person of faith, as demonstrated through George Washington's life and times, you better keep your mouth shut, or this administration and those who are in charge of political correctness will see to it that you regret being so. There's another article by Rebecca Long, "The Holy Warrior," it's entitled. Another interesting article. This goes right along with this administration's zeal to avoid recognizing the enemy against us. We've already seen, as I met with, along with Dana Rohrbacher, Steve King, Loretta Sanchez, we met with Northern Alliance leaders, including General Dustin, the hero in fighting the Taliban. Now, these are Muslims. Some try to paint us as xenophobes, Islamophobes. Isn't it interesting? That term came as a strategy to try to scare off, embarrass, humiliate people who stood up for what was right against Muslim terrorists who want to destroy us, try to intimidate us into not using the word Muslim. For heaven's sake, we know there are Muslim friends. The Northern Alliance with our allies, they're Muslims. We talked about it. Met with some Baluchs from southern Pakistan, some leaders there. They're Muslim. They're our friends. They don't want to destroy us. They want to support us, and some of us want to support them. And yet this administration has such a wrong-headed approach to those who want to destroy our way of life. Can best be illustrated in this chart, illustrating political correctness run amok. The 9/11 Commission report was prepared in a bipartisan fashion before people knew that the Organization of Islamic States, Islamic Society of North America, CARE, would make such a tax on those who dared to point out that even though it's not the mass Muslim population who are our enemy, there are those small group within the Muslim community who want to destroy our way of life. How can you understand and anticipate your enemy's actions, the enemy that has sworn to destroy you, unless you study what they believe and you understand what their approach is, and you understand that people like Ahmadinejad We run out of time. Well, let me conclude by just pointing to this chart. In the Commission report, 322 times Islam's mentioned, jihad's mentioned 126 times, and now it is inappropriate under this administration to mention jihad. It's inappropriate for our justice, intelligence, state to talk about jihad. It doesn't mention al-Qaeda, it doesn't mention Hezbollah, Hamas, Sharia. This administration has run aground, and they have brought their ship right on top of real American heroes. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.